Welcome to the Real Chili Podcast.
And the Golden Eagles of Marquette University in Milwaukee are bound for the Final Four for only the third time ever.
5 seconds left. Marquette down by one, trying to avoid the upset. Blue the drive, the left hand. It's good. 1 second to play. Vander Blue has put Marquette in front by one.
And I want to win every day as basketball players, as students, and I want to win every day, most importantly, as people.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Real Chili Podcast. I'm your host, Mike Lavender. I'm joined by my good buddy, Pete Mohan. Pete, how you doing?
Doing just fine. Nice DePaul win the other night.
Nice DePaul win. Nice Seton Hall win. Tough road game against Butler. Marquette has just started a 9-day break, and we thought this would be a great time to come in and not only talk about how the rest of Marquette's conference season is going to shake out, but how they did in the past 3 games and kind of how that all fits together. It's an important time of year, Pete, when you and I certainly start turning towards, all right, where are we going to be seated? What do we need to do in the final remaining conference games to get a good sense of where Marquette's going to go in the last number of games here in the Big East? We can look to the previous 3 games to figure out, all right, are things starting to come together on defense? Is our offense clicking as highly as it should be? So with that, I kind of want to look back at the 3 games. We haven't done a pod since immediately after the loss to Villanova. Since then, Marquette has gone 2-1 with wins against Seton Hall and DePaul.
At home.
In an away loss to Butler. And I think there's an argument you could make, Pete, that in that 2-1 stretch, Marquette put together 2 of its better defensive performances of this season.
Yeah, probably the 2 best, definitely. And especially that game against Seton Hall where we demoralized them such that there was possessions for Seton Hall in the second half where they were just launching prayers and didn't look like they had much desire to do anything except get back on that plane to Newark. So it was impressive, not just that we prevented them from shooting well or something like that. We actually, physically dominated the most physical team in the Big East to the point that they stuck their tail between their legs and wanted to go home. So that, to me, was a defensive statement that, can't go unsaid. And then DePaul, we held them to 29% shooting. The first half was even worse than that, where we basically doubled them up. So just an all-around defensive grade effort in those games.
And people are going to say, okay, it's DePaul, but Marquette allowed 52 points from DePaul. There's only one other team this season that's held DePaul to fewer points, and that's Michigan State, the number 6 ranked team in Ken Palm. Taken with a grain of salt, but this team seems to be putting things together defensively in a way that they haven't before. Does that mean we are a good defensive team yet? No, not yet, but in the Seton Hall and in the DePaul games, we've shown things. We've shown physical toughness, albeit at home, that we haven't shown before. I think it's interesting when you hear Wojo in the post-game presser not only praise the defense, but he said, keep in mind, we've still got Theo John and Greg Elliott and Jamal Cain who are playing great, but they're still freshmen. At times, they're still playing better at home than they do on the road. But hard to argue with the fact that Harry Froling and the freshmen that I just mentioned coming along, that all of this seems to be slowly maybe gelling into better communication, which is exactly what we need on the defensive end if we're going to make a run later in this season.
Yeah, I think it's a walk before you run type of situation with this defense.
Right.
It's learning to do individual tasks on defense to build a whole defense. And when you have a team that is as inexperienced as Marquette is, according to Ken Palm, the 317th most experienced team, there's a lot of elements that these guys haven't seen yet in their college career. And by the time the Seton Hall game came around, they were able to put together a full 40 minutes of defense. Then it kind of went away against Butler, where Keelan Martin, Weidman, and Baldwin
went off.
Basically did whatever they wanted to because they imposed their will on our defense, and we weren't the aggressors. So I think at the beginning of the season, if we said 2 out of every 3 games we'd have a great defensive performance, I think that you'd say this team would be going places.
I would have taken that.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So, we have a really tough stretch coming up. The next 4 or 5 games, really. Xavier, Nova, Butler, Providence, Seton Hall, all in a row. And that defense is going to be thrown into the gauntlet. If I was to ask you, Mike, if you would take 3 great defensive performances out of those next 5 games, you would take that in a heartbeat, right?
I would take that in a heartbeat, absolutely. And for me, I'm still trying to piece together exactly how this defense is coming together. And we've got a podcast coming up later this week with Ben Steele from the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel that you definitely want to tune into. But we have this conversation about, with the fact that our freshmen, Theo, Greg, and Jamal, and Harry, they play such a big role in our defense because they're athletic, because they're lanky, because they can get boards. Arguably, they play more of a role in our defense than Marcus and Andrew Rousey do, just because of their physical abilities. And the fact that they have now played together for a couple of months, Froling for only a couple of weeks here. But the more time these kids have to gel, that's only going to make our defense better and better.
Well, not only that, but, we look at Marcus and Hauser. I mean, they're teenagers taking care of the family, bringing home, they're teenage breadwinners right now. And, obviously you have Rousey, but aside from that, Marcus and Hauser, they're veterans right now because of the youth on this team. It's a learning experience. The team's going to get better throughout the year, but there's growing pains.
I think one of the biggest developments in transitioning here to kind of looking forward, I think one of the biggest developments that I've seen on defense is Harry Froling starting to pick his spots. He did it against DePaul, needs to continue to do it. Theo John developing into a rim protector of sorts. He hasn't had a ton of blocks, but the blocks that he's had, you remember. I mean, that is authoritative. So I think as Theo continues to feel his way in the Big East Conference, that's only going to yield better and better results. And we're going to need it because, as Pete mentioned just a minute ago, we're about 1/3 of the way through the Big East Conference season. We're at 4-3 right now, which we've said before. This first month and a half of the Big East Conference season is a gauntlet. We've got Xavier twice. We've got Villanova twice. We've got Butler, Seton Hall. So it's important for us to keep our heads above water. Thus far, we've been able to do that. We're at 4-3 headed into this 9-game break. But Pete, looking ahead, this might be one of the toughest 3 or 5-game stretches in the country when Marquette goes, coming back from their break, they go Xavier, Nova, Butler, Providence, Seton Hall.
Luckily, within that 5-game stretch, there is a 3-game homestand. 2 road games at Xavier and Seton Hall sandwiched around a 3-game homestand of Nova, Butler, and Providence. So at least you have the 3 home games to lean on. Now that says nothing about the competition, which is stout to say the least. But if we take 2 out of those 3 games, or 2 out of those 5 games, it sets us up pretty well because that final third of the season includes 4 games against St. John's, DePaul, and Georgetown. It's a pretty favorable final third of the season. So it's almost just survive this next 5-game stretch, get into the home stretch, and really gain some momentum heading into the Big East tournament and hopefully the NCAA tournament.
So arguably, if you look at the statistics, if you look at the metrics, if you look at Ken Pom, basically, you could make the argument that the Big East is better this season as a whole than they were last season. Mm-hmm. And why I bring that up is important because Marquette made the NCAA tournament last year with a 10-8 record in conference, and that was after having lost in their first-round game in the Big East tournament. So looking at that, assuming the Big East is better, your benchmark is probably 10-8. You may be able to squeak in with some of what we did in the non-conference. Now, turns out Wisconsin is not anywhere near what we thought they were, and we had some tough losses in the non-conference. But you're really looking at a situation where 10-8, 11-7 could be a lock to get Marquette in the tournament. And from there, you can get to the point where 7-4, that kind of range is what you're going to need to see from Marquette in these next few games to get ourselves into the tournament.
Yeah, I think compared to last year, you could say that our non-conference performance is sizably better. Just simply, even just by virtue of our losses, we lost to some good teams. Purdue and Wichita State, they're Final Four contending teams. I think that we can all agree about that. And the thing that you can say about Wojo, to me, that's impressive, is that he hasn't put us in situations where we're nervous and on the bubble because our schedule is stacked full of bad losses.
Right. We're not losing to DePaul.
Right, especially these last 2 years. We beat the teams that we should, and we challenge the teams that are better than us.
Yep.
And I think that at this point, with this young roster, that's really all you can ask for. Overall, this season, we've kind of maybe done exactly what we as fans had scripted for us so far.
Yeah.
Maybe exceeded some people's expectations, but certainly I don't think anyone's disappointed with the way Marquette's performed thus far. Exciting offense to watch, and the defense is improving. So for me, we're right where we got to be.
I agree. I think we're right. I agree with that. I think we're right in the spot where you would want us to be. If you had asked me a week ago and we hadn't had these two impressive defensive performances under our belt, my tone might be a little bit different. For me, this whole season comes down to defense. I understand we have freshmen, but we need to put it together at least to be effective enough where our offense can deliver wins. And I hadn't seen that, to be perfectly honest with you, until the past week or so against Seton Hall and DePaul. So I want to continue to see that. But let's just look at the next three games, Mohan. We've got Xavier, Villanova, and Butler. So it's at Xavier and then 2 home games against Villanova and Butler. By the way, your friends from the Real Chili podcast will be at the Villanova game in Milwaukee, so get ready for that. But Pete, if you're looking at that 3-game stretch, one of the toughest 3-game stretches in the country, I mean, I would be thrilled with 2-1 in that. I might even take 1-2 and be happy with that. I think that stretch is that difficult to go up against those teams.
Our best chance is at Xavier, honestly, even though we have Nova and Butler at home.
We match up well against them.
I think we match up well against Xavier. Our defense is going to be improved from the first time that we've seen them. I like our chances. I don't think that they maybe have the same firepower that we have. We have the ability to shoot ourselves into a win, and I think that we almost did it in our first game, but just really couldn't get the stops and kind of fumbled it away at the end. Look, Villanova is who they are, possibly the best team in the country, ranked that way, multiple directions. It's hard to expect a win in any scenario. I hope to God that we fight against them and put up a good show because we'll be there. Butler, I don't know. Do you think we match up well against Butler? I mean, they kind of abused our defense last week, and I worry that our defensive pressure on the perimeter isn't enough to contain Baldwin, and he really facilitated well and got them rolling on offense.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's Baldwin, but obviously from this past game, Keelan Martin put up 37 points, and I think he's a matchup problem for us in that, from a body type standpoint, Sam Hauser is the natural person to guard Keelan Martin. But I think Keelan Martin possesses more to his game. He can get off screens. He's a little more shifty and can move horizontally better than Hauser can. But I just don't think players like Greg Elliott, who again, terrific defender, love the attitude, but physically isn't able to play with someone like Keelan Martin. So I kind of go back to what Wojo said. When we don't play well against Butler, Wojo comes back in the press conference and says he's not happy with the effort and we didn't have it down the stretch. Keep in mind that although we lost 94-83 to Butler, Marquette was up by 7 with 10 minutes left in that game on the road. I mean, that was an instance of Butler, who has seen upper class leadership. They're at home. They'd had a tough stretch, and they really put the clamps down on a Marquette team, and we weren't able to answer. Yeah. That's a tough thing to do.
I think they really fed off of that crowd.
Yeah,
I mean, it was a hype crowd on a Friday night and nationally televised game, so they were up for it. You got to give them credit. They took the game to us, not vice versa. Yep. And, that's why we crumbled down the stretch. So
I mean, I'm not confident that Marquette can take down Butler. I kind of agree with you that playing at Xavier we have a good opportunity there. But to me, I think I love how you put it in saying we got to take it to them defensively. I think our freshmen are learning how to be physical, particularly Theo, without fouling. And that's so important, Greg Elliott being able to do that. So I think it's going to be really interesting to watch to see how this plays out defensively, because I think the pieces are starting to come together. And as you said, that's almost all we can ask for at this point.
I think if you put Butler and Marquette on a neutral court playing a 7-game series, it would go 7 games. I think that maybe Marquette has a little more natural talent, but Butler is just bigger and more experienced. Yeah. That gives you the edge, especially at home.
So the bracket matrix, if you haven't visited it before, bracketmatrix.com, you'll start hearing about that a lot in the coming months from everybody and their brother. It basically aggregates all of the NCAA brackets that exist in the known universe and compiles them into some sort of mega ranking. And Marquette is currently a 10 seed, the third number 10 seed in the bracket matrix. So we're 10 with Missouri, Alabama, and St. Mary's from California. So just to give you a sense of where Marquette is currently slated, I don't know if that's something I'd necessarily disagree with, but something to give you context going forward.
I think one more thing, Mike, is that when it comes down to it, I honestly think that we could get in with a 9-9 in the Big East. I hope that we don't, and I don't think that we will have that record. But if it does come down to it, the committee is going to look at Rousey, Howard, and Hauser and say that's a team that can get wins in the tournament. Even if we were in that play-in game in Dayton, Marquette would be that team that wins out of Dayton and makes it to the Sweet 16.
And we're fun to watch.
I think that's and I think that, not that they would ever factor this in, but Marquette maybe would draw a few ratings and travel pretty well to a tournament site. So that's another thing that maybe goes into their thinking, even though they won't admit it. But look, this is an appealing team come March. They're worth watching on TV, and they're exciting. Regardless of what their RPI says or something like that, this is a team that the tournament committee wants to be in.
Yeah, I totally agree, and I think one thing that's going to make it easier for Marquette to get in is the tournament committee's looking at us. Let's see if we can get a couple road wins here down the stretch. I mean, we've got an impressive road win that went to overtime in Providence. That was probably our best road win on the season. Let's see if we can pick up one against Xavier, pick up one against Seton Hall or Creighton, because I think that, particularly if we're at 9-9, as you said, or even 10-8, that's something that can put you over the top. Demonstrate to the committee that you can go on the road or even a neutral court and put up a good performance. That's only going to help us at the end.
Right. And so far we've played 7 games. 2 have been easy ones against Georgetown and DePaul. The other 5 have been pretty challenging. And we've gone 2-3 in those games. Added 2 nice wins to our resume in Providence and Seton Hall. So I think that you look at this next 5-game stretch, if we're able to add 2 more good wins out of that 5, that bolsters a resume for me, barring some collapse against DePaul and Georgetown late in the season. That makes a good resume and is enough.
Wrapping up here, I'm not so used to us being so rosy on this pod, and I think if we had more people, there'd certainly be other differing opinions to push back against it. But I do think, as you said, Pete, that we're in a good spot, and I think fans should not only get their ass to the Bradley Center and any away games you can make it to watch this team, but tune in, because I think this is really shaping up to be a fun final 2/3 of the Big East, and who knows what in the Big East tournament. With this offense and with the way this defense could start clicking, it could get really fun.
Well, and Sunday, January 28th, home against Nova.
That's right.
No excuses. There's no NFL games that weekend, except if you count the Pro Bowl or some shit.
Yeah.
Look, that's the week before the Super Bowl. No excuse. Sunday afternoon, get there to the Nova game. It's going to be some serious ball.
And your friends from the Real Chili podcast are going to be there too, so definitely no excuses. All right, folks, that's going to do it for us here at the Real Chili podcast. I hope you enjoyed this episode. I've said it a couple of times. Keep an eye out for our episode coming later this week, probably on Thursday, with Ben Steele from the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel. It's a great episode, great conversation with Ben. And keep your eye out for a special episode with a special guest, a very famous special guest.
The Golden Eagle?
The Golden Eagle, yeah, that's right. Keep an eye out for a very special guest coming up soon on this podcast. I think you're really going to like it. So signing off for Pete Mohan. Pete, thanks for joining me tonight.
Oh, you're so welcome. You're such a tease with those next episodes. I'm excited. I don't even know who the guests are.
I know.
I'm just kidding. I know who it is.
No, he's confirmed. He'll be here. All right, so signing off for Pete Mohan, I'm your host, Mike Lavender, and all the fellas who put work into this Real Chili podcast. We'll talk to you next time.